sleep study.
First principles thinking. This is one of the most powerful mental models for understanding reality. It allows you to cut through assumptions, get to the core of a problem, and build solutions from the ground up. Most people rely on borrowed thinking. They do what others have done, make small tweaks, or follow standard rules. That might work for simple tasks, but when the challenge is new, complex, or broken, copying the past usually fails. First principles. Thinking starts by asking, what do I know for sure? What are the basic facts, independent of trends, habits, or opinions? Once you've got those, you rebuild from scratch. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're trying to eat healthier. Most people look up popular diet plans or follow what worked for someone else. But first principles thinking asks, what does my body actually need to function well? At the most basic level, it needs enough protein, vitamins, energy, and hydration. Once you understand those needs, you can build a diet that works for you, regardless of fads, labels, or influences. This way of thinking changes how you approach everything: health, work, money, even relationships. It makes you ask better questions. It forces you to stop leaning on defaults and start thinking clearly. It's not about being a contrarian. It's about getting to what's real. Because when you understand the fundamentals, you don't just copy what works. You understand why it works. That gives you power, not just to follow, but to innovate. First, principles. Thinking won't make decisions for you, but it gives you something better: clarity. And in a noisy world, that might be the most valuable tool of all. Second-order thinking. Some decisions feel right in the moment, but end up causing problems later. That's where second-order thinking comes in. Second-order thinking is a mental model that helps you look beyond the immediate outcome of a decision and consider what might happen next. Instead of stopping at the first effect, you ask what that effect might lead to. This kind of thinking helps you anticipate long-term consequences and avoid unintended results. For example, imagine a company cuts prices to attract more customers. First-order thinking says lower prices equal more sales. But second-order thinking asks, what happens after that? Maybe the profit margin shrinks. Maybe competitors drop their prices too, leading to a price war. Maybe the brand becomes associated with cheapness, which hurts its long-term image. What seemed smart at first could turn out to be damaging. This model applies to everyday life too. Suppose you stay up late to finish a project. First-order thinking says you met the deadline, but second-order thinking considers the impact of lost sleep. Will your focus drop tomorrow? Will that lead to more mistakes or missed opportunities? The goal is not to overthink every decision. It's to slow down enough to consider more than just the immediate win. Many of the worst outcomes in history, from failed policies to financial crises, happened because people only looked one step ahead. Second order. Thinking doesn't require advanced knowledge. It just takes the habit of asking, and then what? Over and over until you see the bigger picture. It helps you make choices that aren't just good today, but still make sense tomorrow. In a world full of quick fixes and short-term rewards, this kind of thinking gives you an edge that most people overlook. Circle of competence. Everyone has things they're good at and things they're not. The problem is, most of us think we know more than we do. The circle of competence is a mental model that helps fix that. It simply means knowing what you understand well and staying within that area when making important decisions. You don't have to know everything. You just need to know what you actually know and be honest about what you don't. Your circle might include topics you've studied, problems you've solved, or industries you've worked in. For example, a doctor probably has a strong grasp of medical decisions but might not be the best person to guess where interest rates are headed. A software engineer might be great at designing systems, but not necessarily qualified to give parenting advice. The point is, being smart in one area doesn't mean you're smart in all of them. Trouble starts when people step outside their circle without realizing it. An investor might take a risky bet on a business they don't understand. A leader might ignore expert advice and try to fix something they've never dealt with before. When decisions go wrong in these situations, it's often not about intelligence. It's about drifting too far outside the boundary of what they actually know. This model isn't about limiting growth, it's about making better choices. Knowing your circle helps you act with more confidence when you're inside it and ask better questions when you're not. It keeps you grounded and reduces overconfidence, which is a major source of error in both everyday life and big decisions. Understanding the limits of your knowledge is a strength, and recognizing where those limits are, that's the value of knowing your circle of competence. Thought experiments. You don't always need a lab to test an idea. Sometimes all you need is your mind. A thought experiment is a mental exercise where you imagine a situation to explore its logic, consequences, or contradictions. It's a way of testing ideas without needing to physically run an experiment. Philosophers, scientists, and thinkers have used thought experiments for centuries to challenge assumptions and uncover deeper truths. One of the most famous examples is Schrödinger's cat. In this setup, a cat is placed in a sealed box with a mechanism that has a 50% chance of killing it, based on a random quantum event. Until someone opens the box, the cat is considered both alive and dead at the same time. Schrödinger wasn't suggesting anyone should do this. He was using the scenario to highlight the strange behavior of particles in quantum physics. Thought experiments work because they strip away the noise. By isolating variables in an imagined scenario, they help us focus on the core logic of a problem. For example, the trolley problem, often used in ethics discussions, forces people to confront difficult trade-offs by removing distractions and zeroing in on one moral choice. These mental models aren't just for scientists and philosophers. Anyone can use them. You might imagine how a new policy would affect a company before trying it, or picture how someone might react to a decision you're about to make. In both cases, you're mentally simulating outcomes to improve your thinking. Thought experiments don't give you answers, but they make your thinking sharper. They help clarify complex issues, reveal hidden assumptions, and push ideas to their limits, all without leaving your chair. Probabilistic thinking. Most people want a clear answer, yes or no, right or wrong, win or lose. But the real world rarely works like that. Probabilistic thinking is a mental model that helps you deal with uncertainty. Instead of asking, will this happen or not, it asks, how likely is this to happen? It's about thinking in terms of chances and weighing possibilities instead of relying on black and white outcomes. Imagine you're planning a picnic. The weather forecast says there's a 30% chance of rain. That doesn't mean it will rain or it won't. It means there's a 3 in 10 chance you'll get wet. A lot of people ignore that and plan as if it's definitely going to be sunny or definitely going to storm. Probabilistic thinking means you prepare for both and manage the risk. This mindset becomes even more important when the stakes are high. A business might launch a new product knowing there's a 60% chance of success, but also a 40% chance of failure. That doesn't mean they made a bad decision if it fails. It just means they took a calculated risk. Over time, consistently making decisions based on good probabilities is what leads to success. Probabilistic thinking also helps avoid emotional overreactions. If something unlikely happens, like a rare event or a freak accident, it doesn't always mean you made a bad call. It just means you were playing the odds, and sometimes the odds don't break your way. This kind of thinking requires practice. It means getting comfortable with uncertainty, using data when possible, and making peace with the fact that good decisions can still lead to bad outcomes. It's not about predicting the future perfectly, it's about playing the game wisely over time. Inversion. People try to reach their goals by asking what they need to do. But there's another approach that's often more effective. Ask what to avoid. Inversion is a mental model that flips a problem on its head. Instead of only thinking forward, you also think in reverse. If the goal is success, inversion asks, what would cause failure? If the goal is happiness, inversion asks, what creates misery? It works by focusing on what not to do, which is often more obvious and easier to control. This kind of thinking is useful because we're often too focused on ideal outcomes. We imagine what we want, but ignore the obstacles that stop people from getting there. Inversion brings those blind spots to the surface. It's a practical way to avoid common mistakes before they happen. For example, if you want to run a successful meeting, most people plan the agenda and talking points. Inversion asks, what would ruin the meeting? Maybe showing up unprepared, dominating the conversation, or not listening. Avoiding those things could be just as important as what you include. It applies across all kinds of decisions. Athletes use it to identify habits that lead to injury. Startups use it to predict what might cause them to fail. Even in relationships, you can use inversion to avoid behaviors that damage trust. Inversion doesn't mean you only focus on the negatives. It means you balance your thinking by working from both directions. Forward thinking shows you what to aim for. Inversion shows you what to steer away from. The two together create a clearer path. By removing the obvious sources of failure, inversion often reveals what really matters long before the consequences arrive. It's a simple shift in mindset, but one that changes how problems are solved. The efficiency gap. Most people believe that working harder automatically leads to better results, but there's a hidden trap that catches almost everyone. The efficiency gap exists between effort and outcome, and understanding this gap can transform how you approach any challenge. Imagine two people trying to lose weight. Person A spends 2 hours at the gym every day, doing random exercises, eating whatever feels healthy, and tracking nothing. Person B spends 30 minutes doing specific compound movements, follows a calculated nutrition plan, and measures progress weekly. After 3 months, Person A has barely changed, while Person B has transformed completely. The difference isn't effort, it's efficiency. Person A worked 6 times harder, but Person B understood leverage, the principle that small, precise actions can create massive results. This is why some people seem to effortlessly excel, while others struggle despite incredible dedication. Efficiency isn't about doing more, it's about doing the right things in the right sequence at the right time. It's about finding the path of least resistance that leads to maximum impact. Once you understand this principle, you'll never waste energy on low-value activities again. The paradox of choice. Analysis paralysis. When faced with endless options, the human brain doesn't celebrate freedom, it freezes. This is why grocery stores with 50 types of jam sell less than stores with 3 options. Why Netflix viewers spend more time browsing than watching, and why some of the most successful people limit their daily decisions to the absolute minimum. Choice overload creates a psychological burden that most people don't recognize. Every decision you make depletes mental energy, even small ones like what to wear or what to eat for breakfast. By the end of the day, your decision-making capacity is severely compromised, leading to poor choices when they matter most. The solution isn't more willpower, it's fewer decisions. Eliminate trivial choices through systems and automation so you can focus your mental energy on what actually moves the needle forward. This is why Mark Zuckerberg wears the same outfit, why Warren Buffett has simple investment criteria, and why elite athletes follow rigid routines. When you reduce decision fatigue, You don't just save time, you preserve the cognitive resources needed for breakthrough thinking. This small shift in how you structure your day can have profound effects on everything you accomplish. The sunk cost trap. Humans have an irrational attachment to things they've already invested in: time, money, effort, emotion. Even when continuing forward guarantees more loss. This cognitive bias destroys businesses, relationships, and entire life paths because people can't walk away from bad investments. Imagine you're 2 hours into a terrible movie. You know it's not getting better, but you stay because you've already invested the time. Or consider someone in a dead-end job who won't quit because they've already spent 5 years there. The sunk cost fallacy makes people throw good resources after bad indefinitely. The trap feels logical because walking away feels like admitting failure, like all that previous investment was wasted. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Those resources are already gone, whether you continue or not. The only question that matters is what gives you the best future outcome. Recognizing sunk costs requires emotional discipline. It means accepting that past investments don't justify future ones. It means cutting losses quickly and redirecting energy toward opportunities with actual potential. While this feels uncomfortable initially, it's the difference between stagnation and breakthrough. The compound effect. Small, consistent actions create exponential results over time, but most people abandon their efforts right before the compound effect kicks in. They expect linear progress and quit when they don't see immediate dramatic change. Compound growth starts slowly, almost imperceptibly. Reading 10 pages a day doesn't feel significant, but it's 18 books a year. Saving $50 a week seems trivial, but it's financial freedom in a decade. Writing 500 words daily feels pointless, but it's multiple novels over time. The magic happens in the later stages of the compound curve, where small, consistent efforts suddenly create massive, visible results. You only reach those later stages if you persist through the early phases when progress feels non-existent. This is why most people fail at long-term goals. They judge daily actions by daily results instead of understanding that today's actions create next year's outcomes. The compound effect requires faith in the process and patience with the timeline, but it's perhaps the most reliable path to extraordinary results. The contrast principle. Context shapes perception more than absolute value. People don't evaluate things in isolation. They judge everything relative to what they've recently experienced. Savvy individuals use this principle to influence decisions and outcomes. Restaurants place expensive items at the top of the menu to make mid-priced options seem reasonable. Car salespeople show the premium model first to make the standard version feel affordable. Negotiators start with extreme positions to make their real targets seem moderate. This principle explains why a warm day in winter feels amazing while the same temperature in summer feels cold. Why a small apartment feels spacious after viewing tiny studios, and why a modest salary increase feels generous after expecting none. Understanding contrast allows you to reframe any situation by controlling the comparison points. If you want someone to appreciate something, show them something worse first. If you want to motivate change, help people see the gap between current and possible. The focusing illusion. People dramatically overestimate how much any single factor will impact their overall happiness or success. They focus intensely on one variable while ignoring everything else that actually matters. This creates distorted decision-making and unrealistic expectations. Someone might believe that moving to California will solve their problems, getting promoted will make them happy, or buying a house will provide security. They zoom in on one change while forgetting that happiness and success emerge from multiple interconnected factors. The focusing illusion explains why lottery winners aren't significantly happier than before, why people in warm climates aren't more satisfied than those in cold ones, and why achieving specific goals often feels anticlimactic. The anticipated transformation rarely materializes because life satisfaction depends on many variables working together. The antidote is systems thinking. Instead of believing one change will fix everything, focus on improving multiple areas simultaneously. Relationships, health, finances, purpose, all contribute to life satisfaction, and neglecting any area undermines the others. The availability cascade. Ideas become popular not because they're true, but because they're repeated frequently. What people hear most often becomes what they believe most strongly. This creates information cascades where false ideas gain momentum simply through repetition. Social media accelerates availability cascades by amplifying certain narratives while suppressing others. The algorithm shows you more of what you've already seen, creating the illusion that those viewpoints are more common than they actually are. This principle explains how myths become accepted wisdom, how fear campaigns shape public opinion, and how marketing messages become cultural beliefs. The most available information feels like the most accurate information, even when it's completely wrong. Protecting yourself from availability cascades requires intentional exposure to diverse information sources, questioning popular narratives, and remembering that frequency of exposure doesn't equal accuracy of content. The paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance leads to the elimination of tolerance itself. If a society tolerates intolerance without limits, the tolerant voices will eventually be silenced by those who don't respect the principle of tolerance. This creates an impossible situation for anyone committed to openness and dialogue. How do you remain tolerant while protecting tolerance itself? How do you defend free speech without allowing speech that destroys free discourse? The resolution requires recognizing that tolerance isn't passive acceptance of everything. It's an active commitment to maintaining the conditions that allow diverse viewpoints to coexist. This sometimes means drawing boundaries around behaviors that undermine the system itself. The Peter Principle. People rise to their level of incompetence. Excellent individual contributors get promoted to management where they struggle. Excellent managers get promoted to executive roles they can't handle. The skills that make someone successful at one level often don't transfer to the next. This creates organizations filled with people who are slightly overwhelmed in their current positions. They were competent at their previous role, but struggle with new responsibilities they never asked for and aren't naturally suited for. The Dunning-Kruger effect. The less someone knows about a topic, the more confident they are in their opinions. This creates a world where the loudest voices often represent the least informed perspectives, while genuine experts express appropriate uncertainty. Beginners don't know what they don't know, so they overestimate their understanding. Intermediate learners discover the complexity and become more humble. Experts understand both the depth of the field and the limits of their knowledge. This effect explains why internet debates are dominated by confident assertions rather than nuanced discussion, why simple solutions are popular for complex problems, and why expertise is often dismissed in favor of intuitive but incorrect explanations. The planning fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long projects will take, how much they will cost, and how difficult they will be. This isn't occasional poor judgment. It's a systematic bias that affects nearly everyone, nearly all the time. The planning fallacy explains why construction projects go over budget, why software launches get delayed, and why personal goals take longer than expected. We focus on the best-case scenario while ignoring the historical base rate of similar projects. Overcoming the planning fallacy requires external perspective taking. The outside view means looking at how long similar projects actually took, rather than how long you think yours should take. It means adding buffers for unknown unknowns and planning for setbacks. The endowment effect. Once you own something, you value it more highly than you did before you owned it. This isn't rational evaluation, It's psychological attachment that makes people reluctant to sell, trade, or change, even when better options exist. The endowment effect explains why people hold on to stocks that are losing money, why they keep clothes they never wear, and why they stay in situations that no longer serve them. Ownership creates emotional investment that clouds judgment. Recognizing the endowment effect helps make better decisions about what to keep and what to release. It means regularly evaluating possessions, relationships, and commitments as if you were choosing them fresh today. Loss aversion. The pain of losing something is twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. This asymmetry shapes every decision you make, often in ways that work against your long-term interests. Loss aversion explains why people stick with bad situations rather than risk change, why they hold losing investments too long, and why they avoid trying new things that might not work out. The fear of loss overwhelms the possibility of gain. This bias makes people overly conservative, missing opportunities for growth and improvement. It's why change feels threatening, even when current circumstances are unsatisfactory. The known problems feel safer than unknown possibilities. Understanding loss aversion helps reframe decisions. Instead of focusing on what you might lose, consider what you're already losing by not changing. Instead of avoiding risk, consider the risk of staying the same. Part 3. The hidden architecture of mental models. The human mind operates through invisible patterns, mental frameworks that shape every decision, belief, and perception we hold. These mental models work quietly beneath consciousness, filtering reality and guiding behavior in ways most people never recognize. Understanding these hidden structures isn't just academic curiosity. It's the key to seeing how thoughts become actions, how beliefs become destiny, and how small shifts in perspective can transform entire lives. Mental models function like invisible software running in the background of consciousness. They determine what we notice and what we ignore, what feels possible and what seems impossible, what appears logical and what strikes us as absurd. Most people live their entire lives without examining these underlying programs, never realizing that changing them could change everything. Consider how two people can witness the same event, yet walk away with completely different interpretations. One sees opportunity where another sees threat. One finds meaning where another finds chaos. The difference isn't in what happened, it's in the mental models each person used to process what they experienced. These frameworks act as both lens and filter, shaping not just how we understand the world, but what version of the world we're capable of seeing. The power of mental models lies in their invisibility. When you're using a mental model, you're not aware of using it. You're simply thinking. It feels like direct perception of reality rather than interpretation through a framework. This creates both their strength and their danger. Strong mental models allow rapid, effective decision-making by providing proven patterns for understanding complex situations. But outdated or flawed mental models can trap people in cycles of poor decisions while remaining completely invisible to those trapped within them. Take the mental model of scarcity versus abundance. Someone operating from a scarcity model sees the world as a zero-sum game where resources are limited and competition is inevitable. Every decision flows from this assumption: hoard what you have, compete fiercely for more, trust sparingly because others are competitors for finite resources. This model creates behaviors that often reinforce its own assumptions, generating cycles of conflict and limitation. An abundance model sees the world differently, as a place where value can be created, where cooperation often yields better results than competition, where helping others succeed can expand opportunities for everyone. The same situations that trigger defensive behavior in the scarcity model become opportunities for collaboration and growth in the abundance model. Neither model is universally correct, but each creates different possibilities for the person using it. The challenge with mental models is that they become self-reinforcing. A scarcity mindset notices evidence of limitation and competition, while filtering out examples of abundance and cooperation. An abundance mindset does the reverse. Over time, each model shapes behavior in ways that tend to create the very conditions the model predicts. The scarcity thinker's defensive behavior generates defensive responses from others, confirming that the world is indeed competitive and threatening. The abundance thinker's collaborative approach often generates cooperation, confirming that mutual benefit is possible. This self-reinforcing nature explains why changing mental models can be so difficult, yet so transformative. The model doesn't just shape what you think, it shapes what you experience. Changing the model changes the reality you encounter because it changes how you act and therefore how others respond to you. Mental models operate at different levels of abstraction. Some are specific to particular domains: how markets work, how relationships function, how learning happens. Others are more fundamental, affecting how you view causation, time, identity, and possibility itself. The deepest models are often the most invisible and the most powerful because they influence everything else you think and do. Consider the mental model of fixed versus growth mindset. A fixed mindset assumes that abilities, intelligence, and character are static traits that can't be significantly developed. This model leads to behaviors focused on proving rather than improving, avoiding challenges that might reveal limitations, giving up quickly when things get difficult, seeing effort as a sign of inadequacy rather than a path to mastery. A growth mindset assumes that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. This model leads to different behaviors, embracing challenges as opportunities to learn, persisting through difficulties, seeing effort as the path to mastery. The same setback that confirms failure and limitation in a fixed mindset becomes valuable feedback and a step toward improvement in a growth mindset. The profound impact of this difference demonstrates how mental models shape not just perception, but reality itself. The fixed mindset student avoids challenges and gives up quickly, thereby limiting their development and confirming their beliefs about their fixed limitations. The growth mindset student seeks challenges and persists through difficulties, thereby developing their abilities and confirming their beliefs about the possibility of improvement. Each mindset creates the evidence that supports it. Mental models also determine what questions we ask and what solutions we consider. Someone using a mechanistic model sees problems as broken parts to be fixed or replaced. Someone using an organic model sees problems as symptoms of systemic imbalance requiring holistic solutions. Someone using a competitive model asks, "How do I win?" while someone using a collaborative model asks, "How do we all succeed?" The questions generated by our mental models are often more important than the answers we find, because the questions determine what we're looking for and therefore what we're likely to discover. A person asking, "Why do I always fail?" will find different information than someone asking, "What can I learn from this experience?" Both might be looking at the same situation, but their mental models generate different questions that lead to different insights and different actions. Understanding mental models reveals why rational argument often fails to change minds. When someone's mental model is challenged, they're not just defending an opinion, they're defending their entire framework for understanding reality. Attacking the model directly often strengthens it, because the challenge is processed through the very model being challenged. The scarcity thinker interprets criticism of their worldview as evidence that others are trying to take something from them, confirming their model. The fixed mindset person interprets challenges to their beliefs as attacks on their identity, confirming their need to defend rather than grow. Effective change often requires working with mental models indirectly, not attacking them, but offering new experiences that don't fit within the existing framework. When the model can't explain what's happening, it becomes open to revision. This is why powerful learning often happens through experience rather than explanation, through stories rather than arguments, through questions rather than answers. The business world provides clear examples of how mental models shape outcomes. Companies operating from an industrial model focus on efficiency, standardization, and control. They see employees as resources to be optimized and customers as targets to be captured. This model worked well in stable, predictable environments, but struggles in rapidly changing markets that require innovation and adaptation. Companies operating from a network model see themselves as part of interconnected ecosystems. They focus on relationships, adaptation, and co-creation. They see employees as creative partners and customers as collaborators in value creation. This model tends to perform better in dynamic environments that require flexibility and innovation. Neither model is inherently superior. Each is suited to different contexts. But organizations often become trapped within their models, applying industrial thinking to creative problems or network thinking to efficiency challenges. The model becomes invisible, making it difficult to recognize when a different approach might be more effective. Personal relationships offer another arena where mental models shape reality. Someone operating from a transactional model sees relationships as exchanges of value. I give this, you give that, and we're even. Conflicts arise when the exchange feels unbalanced, and solutions focus on equalizing the transaction. Someone operating from a relational model sees relationships as ongoing connections that create value through interaction itself. Conflicts are seen as opportunities to deepen understanding, and solutions focus on strengthening the relationship rather than balancing the exchange. The same interaction that feels like exploitation in a transactional model might feel like intimacy in a relational model. These different models generate different behaviors, which in turn generate different responses from others. The transactional approach tends to create transactional relationships, while the relational approach tends to create deeper connections. Each model creates the kind of relationships it expects to find. Mental models also shape how we understand time and change. A linear model sees time as a straight line from past to future, with change happening through accumulation of small steps. This model encourages planning, goal setting, and steady progress toward predetermined outcomes. A cyclical model sees time as recurring patterns of growth and decay, expansion and contraction. This model encourages attention to natural rhythms, preparation for inevitable changes, and acceptance of both ups and downs as part of larger cycles. A spiral model sees time as cyclical but progressive. We revisit similar themes and challenges, but at higher levels of understanding and capability. This model encourages learning from repetition rather than being frustrated by it, seeing apparent setbacks as opportunities to integrate lessons more deeply. Each model creates different relationships with time, change, and progress. The linear thinker might see the cyclical thinker as lacking direction, while the cyclical thinker might see the linear thinker as fighting natural rhythms. The spiral thinker might see both as missing the deeper patterns that connect apparent opposites. The field of education reveals how mental models shape learning itself. A transmission model sees education as the transfer of information from teacher to student. Success is measured by how much information is absorbed and recalled. This model creates lecture-based teaching, standardized testing, and passive learning environments. A construction model sees learning as the active building of understanding through experience and reflection. Success is measured by how well students can apply knowledge to new situations. This model creates project-based learning, collaborative environments, and active student engagement. A transformation model sees education as the development of new ways of thinking and being. Success is measured by how students grow as people and how they contribute to their communities. This model creates mentoring relationships, real-world application, and focus on character development alongside academic achievement. Each model shapes not just teaching methods, but what counts as learning, what constitutes success, and what kind of people the educational system produces. Students educated within different models develop different relationships with knowledge, authority, and their own learning process. Mental models operate in the realm of health and healing as well. A mechanical model sees the body as a machine with parts that can break down and need repair. Health problems are seen as mechanical failures, requiring external intervention to fix or replace broken parts. This model leads to symptom-focused treatment, technological solutions, and passive patient roles. An ecological model sees health as a dynamic balance between organism and environment. Health problems are seen as symptoms of imbalance, requiring attention to lifestyle, relationships, and environmental factors. This model leads to holistic treatment, prevention focus, and active patient participation. A developmental model sees health challenges as opportunities for growth and learning. Physical symptoms are understood as expressions of deeper patterns that may include emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions. This model leads to integrative approaches that address root causes and support the person's natural healing capacity. Each model creates different relationships with illness, different treatment approaches, and different definitions of what it means to be healthy. The mechanical model excels at acute intervention, but may miss chronic patterns. The ecological model excels at prevention, but may underutilize technological solutions. The developmental model excels at addressing root causes, but may seem impractical for immediate needs. The power of mental models extends to how we understand success and failure. A performance model sees success as achieving specific outcomes and failure as not achieving them. This model encourages goal setting, measurement, and comparison with others. It can drive high achievement, but may also create anxiety, competition, and a fragile sense of self-worth tied to external results. A learning model sees both success and failure as feedback that provides information for improvement. This model encourages experimentation, resilience, and focus on the process rather than just outcomes. It can foster innovation and personal growth, but may seem to lack urgency or accountability to those operating from a performance model. A contribution model sees success as making a positive difference and failure as missing opportunities to serve others. This model encourages focus on impact, collaboration, and long-term thinking. It can create meaningful engagement and sustainable motivation, but may seem impractical to those focused on immediate personal gain. These different models generate different behaviors, different definitions of progress, and different sources of satisfaction. The performance-focused person might see the learning-focused person as lacking ambition, while the learning-focused person might see the performance-focused person as missing the deeper value of growth. The contribution-focused person might see both as too self-centered, while others might see them as naive about the realities of competition. Mental models also shape how we understand problems and solutions. A problem-solving model sees difficulties as obstacles to be overcome through analysis, planning, and action. This model encourages breaking problems into parts, developing strategies, and implementing solutions systematically. A problem-dissolving model sees difficulties as symptoms of incorrect framing that disappear when viewed from a different perspective. This model encourages questioning assumptions, reframing situations, and finding ways to make problems irrelevant rather than solving them directly. A problem-dancing model sees difficulties as creative tensions that can be worked with rather than eliminated. This model encourages embracing paradox, finding dynamic balance, and using the energy of problems to generate innovative responses. Each approach has its place, but people often get trapped within one model and miss opportunities that other models might reveal. The problem solver might miss the elegant reframe that makes the problem disappear. The problem dissolver might miss practical solutions that could provide immediate relief. The problem dancer might miss clear-cut situations where direct action is needed. The realm of creativity and innovation shows how mental models shape what's possible. A talent model sees creativity as an innate gift that some people have and others don't. This model leads to identification of creative types and can limit opportunities for those not so identified. A skill model sees creativity as a learnable capability that can be developed through practice and training. This model leads to creativity education and can democratize creative opportunities, but may underestimate the role of natural inclination and inspiration. A process model sees creativity as a way of engaging with challenges that anyone can learn and apply. This model focuses on creative thinking methods, collaborative innovation, and systematic approaches to generating new ideas. An emergence model sees creativity as something that arises from the interaction between person, environment, and challenge. This model focuses on creating conditions that support creative emergence rather than trying to control or predict creative outcomes. Each model creates different possibilities for creative expression and innovation. Organizations operating from different models will create different environments, support different kinds of people, and generate different types of creative output. Mental models even shape how we understand understanding itself. A reception model sees knowledge as information that exists independently and can be transferred from one mind to another. This model treats understanding as accumulation of facts and emphasizes accurate transmission of information. A construction model sees knowledge as something each person builds through interaction with information and experience. This model treats understanding as personal meaning, making, and emphasizes active engagement with ideas. A participation model sees knowledge as something that emerges through relationship and dialogue. This model treats understanding as collective creation and emphasizes community, conversation, and shared exploration. A transformation model sees knowledge as something that changes both the knower and the known. This model treats understanding as mutual evolution and emphasizes how learning transforms identity and possibility. These different models create different educational approaches, different research methods, and different relationships with knowledge itself. They also create different ideas about expertise, authority, and how knowledge should be shared and validated. The profound impact of mental models suggests that one of the most important skills anyone can develop is the ability to recognize, examine, and consciously choose the models they use. This requires a kind of metacognitive awareness, the ability to step back from thinking and observe the frameworks that shape thought. This skill begins with recognizing that mental models exist and that they're always operating. Every perception, every judgment, every decision flows through some kind of framework. The question isn't whether to use mental models. That's inevitable. The question is whether to use them consciously or unconsciously. Conscious use of mental models involves several practices. First is learning to notice when you're operating from a particular model. This often happens by paying attention to the questions you're asking, the assumptions you're making, or the solutions you're considering. What model would generate these particular thoughts and approaches? Second is learning to examine the model you're using. What assumptions does it make? What does it help you see, and what might it hide? What kinds of solutions does it suggest, and what alternatives might it miss? This examination isn't about judging the model as good or bad, but about understanding its strengths and limitations. Third is learning to consciously experiment with different models. When faced with a challenge, you might deliberately try viewing it through several different frameworks. How would this look from a competitive versus collaborative model? From a mechanical versus organic model? From a scarcity versus abundance model? Each perspective reveals different aspects of the situation and suggests different approaches. Fourth is developing the ability to switch between models fluidly based on context. Just as you might use different tools for different tasks, you can learn to apply different mental models to different situations. The key is matching the model to the context rather than forcing every situation into your favorite framework. This conscious approach to mental models transforms them from invisible constraints into powerful tools. Instead of being trapped within one way of seeing, you develop a repertoire of perspectives that can be applied strategically. This doesn't building on the powerful mental model frameworks we've explored. Let's delve deeper into how these invisible architectures of thought intersect with one of humanity's most fundamental challenges: the nature of influence itself. Imagine walking into a room where every conversation seems to bend reality around certain speakers. You notice how some people command attention not through volume or authority, but through something far more subtle. They've mastered the art of cognitive resonance. They don't just share ideas, they reshape how others think about thinking itself. This brings us to a particularly sophisticated form of mental modeling: metacognitive influence. Unlike direct persuasion, which targets what people think, metacognitive influence targets how people think. It operates at the level of mental architecture, subtly adjusting the frameworks through which others process information. Consider the Socratic method. Socrates didn't tell people what to believe. He asked questions that revealed the inconsistencies in their existing beliefs. By exposing these contradictions, he created cognitive dissonance that forced people to rebuild their understanding from the ground up. This wasn't manipulation, it was mental model surgery, carefully removing flawed assumptions and allowing better frameworks to emerge. The most effective leaders, teachers, and innovators operate this way. They recognize that lasting change doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from helping others discover better ways of seeing. They plant seeds of curiosity that grow into new mental models. This process requires what we might call cognitive empathy, the ability to understand not just what someone believes, but why their mental models led them to that belief. When you can see the world through someone else's cognitive framework, you can identify the specific assumptions or biases that might be limiting their thinking. Take the concept of reframing. Instead of attacking someone's conclusion directly, you might introduce a new context that makes their existing framework inadequate. A business consultant might not argue against a company's current strategy, but instead present market data that reveals assumptions the strategy was built on no longer hold true. The key insight here is that mental models aren't just individual tools, they're social technologies. They spread from mind to mind, evolve through interaction, and shape entire cultures. Understanding this transmission process gives you profound leverage in creating positive change. But this power comes with responsibility. The same techniques that can help someone break free from limiting beliefs can also be used to install new limitations. The difference lies in intent and outcome. Ethical influence expands someone's cognitive toolkit. Manipulation restricts it. The most sustainable forms of influence work by teaching people how to think more effectively, not what to think specifically. When you help someone develop better mental models, you're giving them tools they can use long after your interaction ends. This creates what psychologists call empowerment rather than dependence. This is why the greatest teachers focus on process over content. They're not trying to download their knowledge into students' minds. They're upgrading the students' cognitive operating systems. Once someone learns how to think more clearly, they can generate insights that even their teacher couldn't have predicted. The same principle applies to personal development. Rather than collecting random life hacks or productivity tips, focus on developing meta skills, the mental models that allow you to learn and adapt more effectively. These include critical thinking, pattern recognition, systems thinking, and cognitive flexibility. As we navigate an increasingly complex world, the ability to think about thinking becomes our most valuable asset. The mental models we've explored aren't just intellectual curiosities, they're practical tools for upgrading human consciousness itself. The future belongs to those who can not only think clearly, but help others do the same. In a world where information is abundant, but wisdom is scarce, the real opportunity lies in becoming a cognitive architect, someone who builds better ways of thinking and shares them with others. Remember, every interaction is an opportunity to either reinforce existing mental models or introduce better ones. The choice is yours, and the impact extends far beyond any single conversation. The invisible framework that governs your thinking isn't just about individual mental models or isolated cognitive biases. It's about something far more profound. The way these mental models interconnect, reinforce each other, and create cascading effects throughout your entire decision-making apparatus. This is where we enter the realm of metacognitive architecture, the hidden operating system that runs beneath your conscious awareness. Think about it this way. You don't just use one mental model at a time. When you're making a complex decision, multiple frameworks are firing simultaneously. Your understanding of incentives might clash with your loss aversion. Your first principles thinking might contradict your reliance on social proof. These aren't bugs in the system, they're features. The tension between competing mental models is where wisdom emerges. Consider the paradox of expertise. The more you know about a subject, the more you realize how little you actually know. This isn't just humility speaking, it's the collision between the Dunning-Kruger effect and genuine competence. Beginners operate with false confidence because they lack the knowledge to recognize their ignorance. Experts operate with earned uncertainty because they understand the true complexity of their domain. This creates a fascinating dynamic. The people who sound most confident are often the least qualified to make predictions. The people who hedge their statements with uncertainty are often the most reliable sources of insight. Yet our brains, wired for survival in a simpler world, gravitate toward confident voices rather than nuanced ones. The amplification effect compounds this problem. In our interconnected world, confident but wrong voices get amplified faster than careful but correct ones. Social media algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. Television producers book guests who make bold claims, not those who speak in measured probabilities. The very systems designed to inform us often systematically misinform us instead. This brings us to the concept of epistemic humility, the recognition that our knowledge is always incomplete, always provisional, always subject to revision. It's not about abandoning conviction or becoming paralyzed by uncertainty. It's about holding your beliefs lightly enough that new evidence can reshape them without shattering your identity. But epistemic humility creates its own challenges. If you're too quick to update your beliefs, you become unstable, blown around by every new piece of information. If you're too slow to update, you become rigid, immune to evidence that contradicts your worldview. The sweet spot lies in calibrated confidence, knowing not just what you believe, but how strongly you should believe it. This calibration requires what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about thinking. Most people operate on autopilot, using their mental models unconsciously. They don't examine the frameworks that shape their perception. They don't question the assumptions that guide their decisions. They don't recognize when they're being influenced by cognitive biases. Metacognition changes everything. When you become aware of your own thinking processes, you gain the ability to intervene in them. You can catch yourself falling for the sunk cost fallacy. You can notice when you're anchoring too heavily on irrelevant information. You can recognize when your emotions are hijacking your rational faculties. But here's where it gets interesting. Metacognition itself can become a trap. When you become hyper-aware of cognitive biases, you might overcorrect. You might second-guess every intuition, even the ones that are serving you well. You might become so focused on avoiding irrationality that you become paralyzed by analysis. This is why wisdom isn't just about knowing more mental models. It's about developing the meta skill of knowing when to apply which model and when to trust your unconscious processing versus your explicit reasoning. Sometimes the gut reaction is right. Sometimes careful analysis leads you astray. The art lies in distinguishing between these situations. The most sophisticated thinkers develop what we might call cognitive flexibility. They can shift between different mental models depending on the context. They can think like a scientist when evaluating evidence, like an artist when generating ideas, like an entrepreneur when assessing opportunities. They don't get trapped in any single framework. This flexibility extends to how they handle contradictions. Instead of rushing to resolve every inconsistency, they learn to sit with paradox. They recognize that complex systems often contain genuine contradictions that can't be easily resolved. The attempt to force premature closure often leads to oversimplification. Consider the relationship between planning and adaptation. Good planning helps you prepare for the future, but over-planning can make you rigid when circumstances change. The solution isn't to abandon planning or to plan for every contingency. It's to develop what military strategists call the commander's intent, a clear understanding of the ultimate objective that allows for tactical flexibility. This principle applies far beyond military strategy. In business, companies that succeed over the long term maintain a clear vision while adapting their methods. In relationships, couples who thrive maintain shared values while allowing each other to grow and change. In personal development, individuals who flourish maintain core principles while remaining open to new experiences. The integration of mental models requires what systems thinkers call dynamic thinking. Instead of viewing your mental frameworks as static tools, you begin to see them as living systems that evolve and interact. Your understanding of incentives influences how you think about human motivation. Your grasp of emergence shapes how you approach complex problems. Your appreciation for feedback loops changes how you interpret cause and effect. This dynamic view reveals something profound about learning itself. Knowledge isn't just accumulation, it's transformation. Each new mental model doesn't just add to your toolkit, it potentially reshapes your entire cognitive architecture. Learning to think in probabilities doesn't just give you a new analytical tool. It fundamentally changes how you perceive uncertainty. The compound effect of mental models creates exponential returns to learning. Early in the process, each new framework provides linear benefits. But as your collection grows and begins to interconnect, the value increases exponentially. Mental models start reinforcing each other, creating powerful synergies that amplify your thinking capacity. This is why some people seem to have an almost supernatural ability to see patterns and make connections that others miss. They haven't necessarily learned more facts. They've developed more sophisticated frameworks for organizing and connecting information. They've built what cognitive scientists call rich knowledge structures. These structures allow for what psychologists term transfer, the ability to apply knowledge from one domain to another. Instead of learning isolated skills, you begin to see the underlying patterns that connect disparate fields. The feedback loops that govern ecosystems help you understand market dynamics. The emergence principles from biology illuminate organizational behavior. The mathematical concepts from physics clarify economic phenomena. But perhaps the most important meta-skill is learning how to learn itself. This means understanding not just what to learn, but how to structure that learning for maximum retention and application. It means recognizing that different types of knowledge require different learning strategies. Factual information needs repetition and organization. Conceptual understanding requires examples and practice. Skill development demands deliberate practice with feedback. The modern world demands this kind of sophisticated learning because the half-life of specific knowledge keeps shrinking. The facts you memorize today might be obsolete tomorrow. The skills you develop now might be automated next year. But the mental models you internalize, the thinking frameworks you develop, these remain valuable across changing circumstances. This is why the most successful people in any field aren't necessarily those who know the most facts. They're those who have developed the most powerful ways of thinking about their domain. They've internalized the mental models that allow them to navigate complexity, adapt to change, and continue learning throughout their careers. The journey toward better thinking is ultimately a journey toward better living. When you understand how your mind works, when you recognize the hidden forces that shape your decisions, when you develop more sophisticated frameworks for making sense of the world, you don't just become more effective, you become more free. Free from the unconscious patterns that once constrained you. Free to choose your responses rather than react automatically. Free to create the life you actually want rather than the one your unexamined mental models default you into. This freedom comes with responsibility. The more clearly you see, the more accountable you become for your choices. You can no longer blame ignorance for poor decisions. You can no longer claim victimhood when your mental models lead you astray. But this responsibility is also empowerment. When you understand the game, you can play it better. When you see the matrix, you can begin to reshape it. You've been building your understanding of complex systems and psychological forces. But there's a darker dimension to how minds can be shaped, controlled, and even weaponized. The methods you're about to learn aren't just theoretical. They've been used throughout history to bend reality itself. Every thought you think, every belief you hold, every decision you make might not be as free as you imagine. There are invisible forces at work, subtle manipulations that can rewrite your perception of truth without you ever realizing it's happening. And once you understand how these psychological weapons operate, you'll start seeing them everywhere. The most dangerous manipulations don't announce themselves. They don't force you to believe something different. Instead, they make you want to believe it. They create conditions where your own mind becomes the prison, and you hold the key but never think to use it. These aren't just abstract concepts. These are real techniques used by cults, abusive relationships, political movements, and even everyday social interactions. They work because they exploit fundamental aspects of human psychology. The same cognitive shortcuts that help us navigate daily life can be turned against us to reshape our reality. What makes these methods so insidious is that they don't feel like manipulation when they're happening to you. They feel like enlightenment, like finally understanding the truth, like making your own choices. The victim becomes complicit in their own control, defending the very system that's enslaving them. Understanding these dark patterns isn't about becoming cynical or paranoid. It's about recognizing when your autonomy is under attack and knowing how to protect yourself. Because in a world where information warfare is constant and psychological manipulation is sophisticated, the ability to think independently isn't just valuable. It's essential for survival. The techniques you're about to discover have been refined over centuries. They've toppled governments, built empires, and destroyed countless individual lives. But they've also been resisted, understood, and overcome by those who recognize them for what they truly are. Knowledge of these methods is like a vaccine for the mind. Once you understand how psychological manipulation works, you develop immunity to its effects. You begin to see the strings that others can't see, the patterns that others miss, the moments when someone is trying to rewrite your reality. This isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting others. Because once you recognize these patterns, you'll notice them being used on people you care about. You'll see how entire communities can be led astray, how good people can be convinced to do terrible things, and how truth itself can be twisted until it's unrecognizable. The journey ahead will be uncomfortable. You'll question things you've taken for granted. You'll wonder how many of your own beliefs were implanted rather than chosen. You'll start to see the manipulation in places you never expected. But this discomfort is the price of mental freedom. Every totalitarian regime, every cult, every abusive relationship relies on the same fundamental principle: controlling information and perception to control behavior. They don't need physical chains when psychological ones are so much more effective. They don't need to break your body when they can reshape your mind. But here's what they don't want you to know. Once you understand their methods, their power over you begins to crumble. Knowledge truly is power, and the knowledge of how minds are controlled is perhaps the most liberating force in human experience. The techniques you're about to learn have been used to convince ordinary people to commit atrocities, to stay in situations that destroy them, to abandon their families and friends, to give up their money and freedom, and to defend ideas that harm them. But they've also been overcome by individuals who refuse to surrender their ability to think independently. This isn't about becoming immune to all influence. That's neither possible nor desirable. Humans are social creatures who learn from each other and are naturally influenced by our communities. This is about recognizing when influence becomes manipulation, when persuasion becomes coercion, and when someone is trying to replace your judgment with theirs. The most sophisticated psychological manipulation often comes disguised as care, love, or wisdom. It presents itself as the solution to your problems, the answer to your questions, the path to happiness or success. It offers certainty in an uncertain world, belonging in a lonely existence, purpose in a meaningless life. Understanding these dark arts of persuasion will change how you see the world. You'll notice the subtle ways people try to influence each other. You'll recognize when someone is testing your boundaries, planting seeds of doubt, or gradually shifting your perspective. You'll see how media, advertising, and political messaging use these same techniques on a massive scale. Most importantly, you'll develop the ability to think independently in a world that profits from your compliance. You'll learn to question not just what you're told, but why you're being told it, who benefits from you believing it, and what you might be missing. The psychological weapons you're about to discover are powerful precisely because they're invisible. They work in the shadows of consciousness, reshaping thoughts and beliefs while the victim remains unaware. But once you shine light on these shadows, their power begins to fade. This knowledge comes with responsibility. Understanding how to manipulate others doesn't mean you should. Recognizing these techniques in action means you have a choice. Remain silent while others are controlled, or find ways to help them see what you see. The battle for mental freedom is fought not with weapons or force, but with awareness, critical thinking, and the courage to question what everyone else accepts as normal. It's a battle that takes place in the quiet moments when you choose whether to think for yourself or let others think for you. Every mind that breaks free from psychological control becomes a beacon for others. Every person who learns to recognize manipulation makes it harder for these techniques to work on a broader scale. Every individual who chooses independent thought over comfortable conformity strikes a blow against those who would control human consciousness. The techniques ahead are not just tools of oppression, they're also keys to liberation. By understanding how minds are controlled, you learn how to free them. By recognizing how reality is distorted, you learn how to see clearly. By studying the methods of psychological enslavement, you discover the path to mental freedom. Gaslighting exists in the space between truth and perception, where reality becomes negotiable and your own mind becomes the battlefield. It's perhaps the most insidious form of psychological manipulation, because it doesn't just change what you believe, it changes what you believe about your ability to believe. The technique is named after a 1944 film, but the practice is as old as human manipulation itself. It works by systematically undermining someone's confidence in their own perceptions, memories, and judgment until they become dependent on the manipulator for their sense of reality. What makes gaslighting so devastatingly effective is its gradual nature. It doesn't begin with massive lies or obvious contradictions. Instead, it starts with small distortions, minor disagreements about what was said or done, subtle questions about your memory or interpretation of events. The process typically unfolds in predictable stages. First comes the seed of doubt, small contradictions that make you question whether you remembered something correctly. Maybe they claim they never said something you clearly remember, or they insist an event happened differently than you recall. Initially, you might push back, confident in your own memory. But the gaslighter is patient and persistent. They'll use your own commitment to truth against you, acting hurt or disappointed that you would question their honesty. They'll make you feel like you're being paranoid or unfair for not trusting them. As the contradictions accumulate, something shifts in your mind. You begin to doubt your own perceptions more quickly, second-guessing your memory before even expressing disagreement. The gaslighter has successfully planted uncertainty in your mental foundation, and now that uncertainty begins to spread, the next phase involves emotional invalidation. Your feelings become wrong, your reactions inappropriate, your concerns unfounded. When you express hurt or anger, you're told you're being too sensitive. When you point out inconsistencies, you're accused of being dramatic or creating problems where none exist. This emotional invalidation is particularly destructive because it attacks your right to feel what you feel. Over time, you begin to police your own emotions, dismissing your instincts and reactions before they can even fully form. Your internal warning system becomes compromised. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of gaslighting is how it corrupts your relationship with reality itself. As your confidence in your own perceptions erodes, you become increasingly dependent on external validation to know what's real. And if the gaslighter is your primary source of that validation, they've effectively gained control over your reality. The isolation that often accompanies gaslighting makes escape even more difficult. Gaslighters frequently work to separate their victims from friends, family, and other sources of perspective. They might claim these people don't understand your relationship or that they're trying to cause problems between you. Without external perspectives to challenge the distorted reality being created, victims of gaslighting often find themselves completely dependent on their abuser's version of events. They lose not just confidence in their own judgment, but the very framework for determining what's true and what isn't. The recovery from gaslighting can be particularly challenging because it requires rebuilding your ability to trust your own perceptions. Victims often struggle with self-doubt long after the manipulation has ended, questioning whether their memories and feelings can be trusted. What makes gaslighting especially insidious in our current information environment is how it can be amplified and systematized. When entire groups or societies experience coordinated campaigns designed to undermine their trust in their own perceptions, the individual psychological damage gets scaled to collective trauma. The defense against gaslighting begins with understanding that your perceptions and feelings are valid, even if they're not perfect. While human memory and judgment can be fallible, the systematic undermining of your confidence in them is often more about control than truth. Maintaining connections with trusted friends or family members who can provide external perspective is crucial. When someone consistently makes you question your own reality, having other voices to help validate your experiences becomes essential for maintaining your psychological equilibrium. Documentation can also be a powerful tool against gaslighting. When conversations and events are recorded in some way, it becomes much harder for someone to convince you that your memory of them is wrong. The gaslighter's power depends on the malleability of memory and perception. Perhaps most importantly, learning to recognize the patterns of gaslighting, the gradual escalation, the emotional invalidation, the isolation tactics, can help you identify when it's happening before it completely undermines your psychological foundation. Gaslighting works because it exploits normal human qualities: our desire to trust those close to us, our recognition that memory can be imperfect, our willingness to question ourselves when faced with confident contradiction. Understanding this can help restore your faith in your own judgment while remaining appropriately humble about its limitations. The goal isn't to become paranoid or to never question your own perceptions. It's to recognize when someone is systematically working to undermine your connection to reality for their own benefit. When doubt is being weaponized against you, the first step to freedom is recognizing the weapon for what it is. Brainwashing represents the systematic destruction and reconstruction of someone's entire worldview, personality, and sense of self. Unlike other forms of manipulation that work around the edges of consciousness, brainwashing attempts to completely rewrite the mental software that makes you who you are. The process was first systematically studied during the Korean War, when captured American soldiers were subjected to intensive psychological manipulation by their captors. What emerged from that research was a chilling understanding of how completely human identity could be reshaped under the right conditions. Brainwashing works through a carefully orchestrated process of breaking down and rebuilding. The first phase focuses on destruction, systematically dismantling the victim's existing beliefs, relationships, and sense of self. This isn't done through rational argument or persuasion, but through creating conditions that make independent thought impossible. Isolation is the cornerstone of effective brainwashing. When you control someone's information environment completely, what they see, hear, and experience, you can begin to reshape their perception of reality itself. Cut off from external perspectives and sources of validation, victims become entirely dependent on their captors for information about the world. Physical and emotional stress play crucial roles in making minds malleable. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, uncomfortable conditions, and constant uncertainty create a state of psychological vulnerability where the normal defenses against manipulation begin to crumble. When someone is focused purely on survival, higher-level thinking becomes impossible. The destruction phase also involves attacking the victim's sense of identity and self-worth. Everything they believed about themselves, their values, accomplishments, relationships, is systematically invalidated and torn down. This creates a psychological void that the brainwasher can then fill with their own ideology. Once the old identity has been sufficiently weakened, the reconstruction phase begins. New beliefs, values, and even personality traits are introduced gradually, always accompanied by rewards for compliance and punishment for resistance. The victim's basic needs for food, comfort, and human connection become contingent on accepting the new worldview. What makes brainwashing particularly effective is how it hijacks the normal learning and bonding processes. Humans naturally form strong attachments to those who control their survival and well-being, even when those same people are the source of their suffering. This psychological phenomenon, known as trauma bonding, becomes a powerful tool for cementing the new identity. The process also exploits cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when our beliefs and actions don't align. When victims are forced to act in ways that contradict their original values, they often resolve the discomfort by changing their beliefs rather than their behavior. Each small compromise makes the next one easier. Language manipulation plays a crucial role in brainwashing. By controlling the words and concepts available to express thoughts, brainwashers can literally change how victims think. When the vocabulary for dissent or independent thought is removed or redefined, resistance becomes not just difficult, but conceptually impossible. The social element of brainwashing cannot be underestimated. When victims are surrounded by others who have already adopted the new ideology, social pressure amplifies the manipulation. The desire to belong and avoid social rejection becomes another tool for enforcing compliance with the prescribed beliefs. Perhaps most disturbing is how brainwashing can make victims genuinely grateful to their manipulators. By creating artificial crises and then providing relief, by breaking people down and then offering salvation, brainwashers can generate authentic feelings of love and loyalty from their victims. The recovery from brainwashing is often lengthy and difficult because it requires rebuilding an entire sense of self. Victims may struggle with identity confusion, difficulty making decisions, and persistent doubts about their own judgment. The process of deprogramming often involves gradually reintroducing critical thinking skills and reconnecting with pre-manipulation relationships and values. Modern brainwashing techniques have evolved beyond the crude methods used in prisoner of war camps. Sophisticated groups now use psychological research to create more subtle but equally effective forms of thought control. They understand how to create dependency, how to isolate gradually, and how to make the process feel voluntary. The defense against brainwashing begins with recognizing the conditions that make it possible. Any situation that involves isolation from outside perspectives, dependency on a single source for basic needs, and pressure to adopt new beliefs should be approached with extreme caution. Maintaining connections to people and ideas outside any potentially manipulative environment is crucial. Diverse relationships and information sources create resilience against attempts to control your mental environment. When you have multiple perspectives available, it becomes much harder for any single source to dominate your thinking. Understanding the psychological principles behind brainwashing, isolation, dependency, stress, identity destruction, and gradual indoctrination can help you recognize when these techniques are being used, whether in extreme situations like cults or in more subtle forms in everyday life. The ultimate defense is maintaining your capacity for independent thought and critical analysis. When someone is working to control your information environment, create dependency, or pressure you to abandon your existing relationships and beliefs, these are warning signs that brainwashing techniques may be in play. Love bombing represents one of the most seductive and dangerous forms of psychological manipulation, precisely because it masquerades as genuine affection and care. It's the process of overwhelming someone with excessive attention, affection, and apparent devotion in order to create emotional dependency and lower psychological defenses. The technique gets its name from the way it floods victims with positive attention like an emotional bombardment. Unlike genuine affection, which develops naturally over time, love bombing is calculated, intense, and designed to overwhelm the target's normal judgment processes. Love bombing typically occurs in the early stages of a relationship, whether romantic, friendship, or even professional mentoring situations. The manipulator showers their target with compliments, gifts, constant attention, and declarations of special connection. They might say things like, "I've never met anyone like you," or "You're the only person who really understands me." What makes this so effective is how it hijacks the brain's reward system. The constant stream of positive reinforcement triggers the release of dopamine, creating an addictive cycle where the victim craves more of this intense attention. It's neurologically similar to drug addiction, creating genuine chemical dependency on the manipulator's approval. The love bomber often claims an instant, deep connection that transcends normal relationship boundaries. They might push for rapid intimacy, sharing deeply personal information early on and encouraging their target to do the same. This artificial acceleration of emotional intimacy bypasses the natural caution that protects us from manipulation. During this phase, the love bomber studies their target intensely, gathering information about their vulnerabilities, desires, insecurities, and dreams. Every piece of information becomes ammunition for deeper manipulation later. They're essentially conducting reconnaissance while disguised as a devoted admirer. The intensity of love bombing serves multiple purposes. First, it creates a stark contrast that will make the inevitable withdrawal of affection feel devastating. Second, it establishes the manipulator as the source of incredible highs, making the victim willing to do almost anything to maintain access to those feelings. Love bombing also works by creating a sense of specialness and uniqueness. The victim begins to believe they're experiencing something rare and precious, a once-in-a-lifetime connection that they'd be foolish to question or risk losing. This makes them more willing to overlook red flags or concerning behaviors. The technique is particularly effective against people who have experienced emotional neglect, rejection, or trauma in their past. The overwhelming positive attention can feel like healing, like finally receiving the love and recognition they've always craved. This makes them especially vulnerable to the manipulation that follows. What makes love bombing so insidious is that it often includes elements of genuine emotion. The manipulator may actually feel some form of affection or attraction, which gives their performance an authentic quality that's hard to detect. They're not necessarily acting entirely false emotions. They're amplifying and weaponizing real ones. The transition from love bombing to devaluation rarely happens overnight. Instead, there's often a gradual reduction in intensity, subtle criticisms mixed with continued affection, or intermittent returns to the original high level of attention. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful tools for creating psychological dependency. When the love bombing begins to fade, victims often blame themselves. They wonder what they did wrong, how they failed to maintain the special connection they thought they had. This self-blame makes them work harder to regain the manipulator's attention, giving the manipulator increasing control over their behavior. The contrast between the love bombing phase and what follows is deliberately stark. After experiencing such intense positive attention, normal levels of affection feel like rejection. The victim's expectations have been artificially elevated, making ordinary treatment feel like abandonment or punishment. Recovery from love bombing can be particularly challenging because victims often continue to hope for a return to the early phase of the relationship. They may stay in harmful situations far longer than they otherwise would, convinced that the real person is the one who showed them such intense affection initially. The psychological impact often extends beyond the relationship itself. Victims may struggle to trust their own judgment about future relationships, wondering if normal, healthy expressions of affection are somehow insufficient because they don't match the artificial intensity they experienced during love bombing. Understanding love bombing requires recognizing that genuine affection develops gradually and allows for individual autonomy. Healthy relationships don't require you to abandon your existing support systems, dramatically change your behavior, or accept treatment that makes you uncomfortable. The warning signs include excessive attention that feels overwhelming rather than comforting, pressure to commit quickly or deeply, isolation from friends and family, and claims of instant, unique connection. When someone seems too good to be true and pushes for rapid intimacy, extreme caution is warranted. Protection against love bombing involves maintaining perspective and pacing in new relationships. Trust should be earned gradually through consistent behavior over time, not granted immediately because of intense declarations or gestures. Keeping connections with friends and family provides external perspective that can help identify manipulative patterns. Most importantly, understanding that genuine love and healthy relationships don't require you to. The power of social proof goes beyond simple imitation. It's about understanding how humans navigate uncertainty through collective wisdom. When we don't know what to do, we look to others for guidance. This isn't weakness, it's evolutionary intelligence. For thousands of years, following the crowd meant survival. The group knew where food was, which paths were safe, which behaviors led to acceptance or exile. But social proof becomes dangerous when it's manufactured. Modern influence masters understand this deeply. They create the illusion of consensus without the reality. Fake reviews, bot followers, staged testimonials, all designed to trigger your ancient instinct to follow the majority. The scariest part, it works even when you know it's happening. Consider the bystander effect. The more people witness an emergency, the less likely anyone is to help. Why? Because everyone assumes someone else will act. The diffusion of responsibility creates a paradox where increased witnesses lead to decreased action. This reveals how social proof can actually inhibit the very behaviors it's supposed to encourage. The antidote isn't to ignore others entirely. It's to distinguish between authentic social proof and manufactured consensus. Real wisdom emerges from diverse, independent decisions. Fake consensus comes from coordinated manipulation. Learning to spot the difference is crucial for maintaining your autonomy in an increasingly connected world. Authority bias operates on an even deeper level. Humans are wired to defer to perceived expertise. This made sense when tribal elders held genuine wisdom earned through experience. But in complex modern society, authority is often symbolic rather than substantive. A lab coat, a title, a confident voice. These symbols trigger automatic compliance, regardless of actual competence. The Milgram experiments revealed this terrifyingly. Ordinary people administered what they believed were fatal electric shocks simply because someone in a white coat told them to continue. The authority figure didn't threaten them or offer rewards. The mere presence of perceived authority was enough to override moral objections and basic human empathy. This bias explains why people follow obviously flawed leaders, accept questionable medical advice, or comply with bureaucratic absurdities. The symbols of authority, uniforms, credentials, institutional backing, trigger ancient submissive responses that bypass critical thinking. We evolved to follow leaders, but we never evolved the ability to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate authority. The most sophisticated manipulators understand that authority doesn't require actual expertise. It requires the appearance of expertise combined with confidence and status symbols. They speak with certainty, surround themselves with impressive credentials, and never admit uncertainty. This manufactured authority becomes self-reinforcing as people defer to it, creating real influence from fake expertise. Commitment and consistency bias reveals another vulnerability in human psychology. Once we make a choice, especially publicly, we feel compelled to defend it. This starts small, agreeing to a minor request, signing a petition, making a statement. But each small commitment creates psychological pressure to remain consistent with our previous actions. This is why effective persuasion often begins with tiny agreements. Get someone to say yes to something trivial, and they're more likely to say yes to something significant later. Their brain wants to maintain consistency with their previous choice. They convince themselves that if they agreed before, they must have had good reasons. This internal rationalization becomes stronger than external arguments. The escalation of commitment can trap people in terrible situations. They stay in failing relationships because they've already invested so much. They continue funding doomed projects because admitting failure means admitting their previous decisions were wrong. They defend beliefs that no longer serve them because changing would require acknowledging they were mistaken. Breaking free requires recognizing that consistency isn't always a virtue. Sometimes the most rational thing is to change course when new information emerges. Your past decisions don't have to dictate your future ones. The courage to admit mistakes and change direction is often the path to better outcomes. Scarcity manipulation exploits our ancient fear of missing out. When resources were truly limited, those who grabbed opportunities first survived. Those who hesitated starved. This urgency response is deeply embedded in our psychology, making us act quickly when we perceive something is running out. Modern scarcity is often artificial. Limited time offers that repeat monthly. Exclusive products available to thousands. Rare opportunities that somehow keep appearing. The manipulation works because our brains can't distinguish between real and manufactured scarcity. The emotional response is the same regardless of actual availability. The most insidious form is attention scarcity. Social media platforms create endless streams of content, making each post feel urgent and fleeting. Fear of missing out drives compulsive checking, infinite scrolling, and anxiety about being left behind. The scarcity isn't of content. There's more than anyone could ever consume, but of relevance and social connection. True scarcity is usually quiet. Genuine opportunities don't need artificial urgency. Real expertise doesn't require constant promotion. Authentic relationships don't demand immediate decisions. Learning to distinguish between natural and manufactured scarcity helps you make better choices without the pressure of false urgency. The anchoring effect shows how easily our perceptions can be manipulated through initial reference points. The first number you hear, the first price you see, the first impression you form, these anchors drag all subsequent judgments towards them. Even when you know the anchor is irrelevant, it still influences your thinking. Negotiators use this ruthlessly. The first offer sets the anchor, pulling the final agreement toward it regardless of objective value. Retailers place expensive items next to moderate ones, making the moderate prices seem reasonable by comparison. Even random numbers can serve as anchors, influencing completely unrelated decisions made afterward. The persistence of anchoring reveals how much of our thinking is relative rather than absolute. We don't evaluate things in isolation. We compare them to whatever reference point is most salient. This makes our judgments highly malleable and context-dependent. Controlling the anchor often means controlling the outcome. Awareness helps, but doesn't eliminate anchoring effects. The key is to actively seek multiple reference points before making important decisions. Compare prices across different sources. Get opinions from various perspectives. Generate your own estimates before hearing others. This doesn't eliminate bias, but it reduces the influence of any single anchor. The availability heuristic shows how memory shapes perception in dangerous ways. We judge probability not by statistics, but by how easily examples come to mind. Vivid, recent, or emotionally charged events feel more likely than they actually are. Meanwhile, common but unremarkable events seem rarer than reality. This explains why people fear plane crashes more than car accidents, despite driving being far more dangerous. Plane crashes get massive media coverage, making them memorable and salient. Car accidents are so common, they barely register in our attention. The emotional impact and media coverage distort our risk assessment in systematic ways. Politicians and media outlets exploit this relentlessly. They flood attention with dramatic but rare events while ignoring mundane but significant trends. Terrorism feels more threatening than heart disease. Random violence seems more common than it is. Climate change feels distant because its effects are gradual rather than sudden and dramatic. The solution isn't to ignore vivid events, but to actively seek base rate information. How common is this really? What do the statistics say over time? What am I not seeing because it's not newsworthy? This conscious effort to counteract availability bias leads to more accurate risk assessment and better decision-making. The power of framing reveals how the same information can lead to completely different conclusions depending on how it's presented. A medical treatment with a 90% success rate sounds much better than one with a 10% failure rate, even though they're identical. The frame shapes perception more than the facts. Political messaging masters this art. Tax cuts become tax relief. Spending becomes investment. Regulations become protections or burdens depending on the desired frame. The underlying policies don't change, but public support shifts dramatically based on how they're described. Language becomes a tool for shaping reality rather than simply describing it. Personal framing affects your own experience. Seeing challenges as growth opportunities feels different than seeing them as obstacles. Viewing mistakes as learning experiences changes how you respond to failure. The objective situation remains the same, but your subjective experience transforms through reframing. The most powerful frames feel natural and inevitable. They don't seem like frames at all, just obvious ways of understanding reality. Recognizing framing effects requires stepping back and asking, how else could this be described? What perspective am I not seeing? Who benefits from this particular frame? This meta-awareness helps you see beyond the frame to the underlying reality. Mirror neuron manipulation exploits the brain's built-in tendency to automatically copy others. These specialized cells fire both when you perform an action and when you observe others performing the same action. They're the foundation of empathy, learning, and social bonding. But they also make you vulnerable to unconscious influence. Skilled manipulators mirror your body language, speech patterns, and energy levels to trigger unconscious rapport. Your mirror neurons interpret this similarity as familiarity and safety. You feel understood and connected without knowing why. This artificial rapport can be leveraged to increase compliance and reduce critical thinking. The technique works because it bypasses conscious awareness. You don't notice that someone is subtly copying your posture or matching your speaking pace. The mirroring feels natural, creating a sense of harmony and understanding. This emotional state makes you more receptive to suggestions and less likely to question motives. Mass movements use mirror neuron effects to create collective behavior. Crowds at rallies don't just share ideas, they synchronize physical movements, breathing patterns, and emotional states. This neurological synchronization creates powerful feelings of unity and belonging that can override individual judgment and moral reasoning. Protection requires conscious awareness of your own patterns and how others might be reflecting them back to you. Notice when rapport feels too easy or immediate. Pay attention to whether someone's communication style seems to match yours unusually well. This doesn't mean all mirroring is manipulation, but awareness helps you distinguish between natural resonance and calculated influence. The psychology of small commitments reveals how major life changes often begin with tiny steps. Each small yes makes the next yes easier. Each minor compromise erodes resistance to larger ones. Gradual escalation feels natural and voluntary, even when it leads to destinations you never intended to reach. This foot-in-the-door technique works because humans need to see themselves as consistent. Once you agree to something small, declining a related larger request feels contradictory. Your brain resolves this discomfort by adjusting your self-image to match your actions. You become the kind of person who agrees to these requests. Cults and extremist groups master this progression. They start with seemingly harmless activities, attending a meeting, reading material, making small donations. Each step seems reasonable given the previous one. By the time significant commitments are requested, members have already psychologically invested in the group's identity and goals. The antidote is recognizing that each decision stands alone. Your past agreements don't obligate you to future ones. The person you were yesterday doesn't have to control the person you are today. Every new request deserves fresh evaluation regardless of previous commitments. Loss aversion shows that people fear losing what they have more than they desire, gaining something equivalent. This asymmetry in how we value gains versus losses makes us vulnerable to manipulation through manufactured scarcity, limited time offers, and the threat of missing out on existing benefits. The pain of losing $100 feels roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This isn't just about money, it applies to status, relationships, opportunities, and even abstract concepts like freedom or security. The prospect of loss motivates behavior more powerfully than equivalent potential gains. Marketers exploit this by framing purchases as preventing losses rather than achieving gains. Don't miss out. Last chance. Protect what you've built. The emotional impact of potential loss overrides rational calculation of actual value. People pay more to avoid losing something than they would to acquire it initially. Political messaging leverages loss aversion through fear appeals. Vote for us or lose your freedom, security, way of life. The threatened losses feel more urgent than promised gains. This creates powerful motivation to maintain the status quo or support whoever claims to protect against the feared losses. Understanding loss aversion helps you make more balanced decisions. When facing choices, consciously consider both what you might gain and what you might lose. Recognize when fear of loss is driving decisions that don't align with your actual values or long-term interests. Sometimes the fear of losing is worse than the reality of letting go. The peak end rule reveals that we judge experiences not by their average quality, but by their most intense moment and how they concluded. A painful medical procedure, remembered as tolerable if it ended gradually rather than abruptly. A vacation defined by its highest high and final day rather than the overall average experience. This memory quirk makes us vulnerable to manipulation through carefully orchestrated peak moments and endings. A salesperson might create an emotional high point during their presentation and end with a compelling call to action. A relationship might maintain its hold through occasional intense moments of connection despite overall dysfunction. The rule explains why first and last impressions matter so much. People remember beginnings and endings more vividly than middles. A presentation that starts and ends strongly will be remembered more favorably than one with excellent content, but weak bookends. The overall quality matters less than the peak moments and final impression. This has profound implications for how we structure our own experiences. If you want to remember something positively, engineer peak moments and strong endings. If you're going through something difficult, focus on managing the conclusion and finding moments of meaning or intensity along the way. The contrast principle shows how context shapes perception more than absolute values. A $100 meal seems expensive at a fast food restaurant, but reasonable at a luxury hotel. The same price feels different because the frame of reference has changed. Our judgments are always relative to whatever comparison point is most salient. Skilled negotiators use contrast to make their offers seem reasonable. They might start with an extreme position that makes their actual goal appear moderate by comparison. Or they'll present options in a sequence that makes their preferred choice look like the obvious middle ground. The contrast does the persuasion work without seeming manipulative. This principle extends beyond money to every aspect of human experience. Gratitude depends on contrast. Appreciating what you have compared to what you lack or what others don't have. Happiness often comes from upward progress rather than absolute conditions. The trajectory matters more than the destination. Awareness of contrast effects helps you make more independent judgments. Before evaluating something, consider what you're comparing it to. Seek multiple reference points rather than accepting the first comparison that comes to mind. Sometimes the most important question isn't, is this good? But, compared to what? The mental models you encounter shape your reality more than you realize. They're the invisible frameworks your mind uses to process information, make decisions, and understand the world around you. But here's what most people don't know. These same tools that help you think can also be weaponized against you. Tonight, we're diving deep into the psychology of influence, the dark arts of manipulation, and the cognitive biases that silently control your choices. This isn't just theory. It's a roadmap to mental freedom in a world designed to capture your mind. The architecture of thought. Your brain didn't evolve for the modern world. It developed shortcuts, mental models, to help our ancestors survive in simpler times. These shortcuts still govern how you think today, but they're increasingly exploited by those who understand them. Take anchoring bias. When you see a $500 jacket marked down to $200, your brain anchors to that first price, making the discount feel like a steal. Retailers know this. They deliberately set high anchor prices to make everything else seem reasonable. Your rational mind thinks you're getting a deal, but you're actually being guided toward a predetermined choice. This is just the beginning. Every day, your decisions are influenced by invisible forces, framing effects that change how you perceive information, scarcity tactics that create false urgency, and social proof mechanisms that make you follow the crowd without questioning why. The Dark Psychology Toolkit. The most dangerous manipulations don't feel like manipulation at all. They feel like your own thoughts, your own choices, your own conclusions. Gaslighting doesn't announce itself. It starts small, questioning your memory of a conversation, reframing your emotions as overreactions, slowly eroding your confidence in your own perceptions. By the time you realize what's happening, you've already begun to doubt yourself. Love bombing creates artificial intimacy. The overwhelming attention feels intoxicating because it hijacks your brain's reward system. But it's not about you, it's about creating dependency. Once you're hooked, the attention gets withdrawn, leaving you chasing that initial high and accepting progressively worse treatment to get it back. Emotional blackmail operates through manufactured guilt. After everything I've done for you becomes a weapon that turns your conscience against you. The manipulator doesn't force compliance. They make you feel terrible for not complying willingly. The paradoxes that break reality. Some ideas are so dangerous they threaten your sanity simply by being understood. Rocco's basilisk suggests that a future superintelligence might punish anyone who didn't help create it. Just learning about this concept potentially puts you at risk, a thought experiment that becomes a psychological trap. The simulation argument proposes that you're more likely to be living in a computer simulation than base reality. If advanced civilizations create millions of simulated worlds, the mathematics suggest you're probably in one of them. This isn't science fiction. It's a serious philosophical proposition that challenges everything you assume about existence. These aren't just abstract puzzles. They represent the weaponization of ideas themselves, information hazards that can destabilize your fundamental understanding of reality. The illusion of choice. You think you're making free decisions, but choice architecture shapes every option you encounter. The menu at a restaurant isn't randomly organized. Expensive items are positioned to make mid-range options seem reasonable. Political debates are framed to limit your options to predetermined alternatives. Even your social media feed is curated to reinforce existing beliefs while creating the illusion of diverse perspectives. The contrast principle ensures that your perceptions are always relative. A $100 shirt feels expensive until you see it next to a $300 jacket. Suddenly, the $100 option seems reasonable, even though nothing about the shirt itself has changed. This isn't accident, it's psychological engineering. The attention economy. Your attention is the most valuable commodity in the modern world, and sophisticated systems are designed to capture and monetize it. Social media platforms use variable ratio reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism that makes gambling addictive, to keep you scrolling. You never know when the next post will be interesting, so you keep checking. Recommendation algorithms don't show you what you want to see. They show you what will keep you engaged longest. This creates echo chambers that feel like personal preference, but are actually algorithmic manipulation. Your worldview isn't just your own. It's been shaped by artificial intelligence designed to maximize engagement, not truth. Escaping the matrix. Awareness is the first step to freedom, but it's not enough. Knowledge of these techniques can actually make you more susceptible to them if you become overconfident in your ability to resist. The key is developing metacognitive awareness, thinking about your thinking. Question your emotional reactions. When you feel urgency, ask who benefits from your haste. When something seems obviously true, examine what evidence you're using and where it came from. When you feel certain about your beliefs, consider what it would take to change your mind. Practice intellectual humility. The more you learn about cognitive biases and manipulation techniques, the more you realize how vulnerable you are. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The people most susceptible to manipulation are those who believe they're immune to it. The power of mental models. Understanding these frameworks gives you a choice. You can use them to improve your thinking and decision-making, or you can become a victim of those who use them against you. Mental models like inversion, thinking about what you want to avoid rather than just what you want to achieve, can help you navigate complex decisions more effectively. The map is not the territory. Every mental model is a simplified representation of reality, useful but incomplete. The danger comes when you mistake the map for the territory itself, when you let any single framework become the only lens through which you see the world. The ultimate meta game. This knowledge comes with responsibility. Understanding influence and persuasion is like learning to use fire. It can warm your home or burn it down. The same techniques used to manipulate can be used to educate, inspire, and genuinely help others. The goal isn't to become immune to influence. That's impossible and would make you unable to learn or connect with others. The goal is to recognize influence when it's happening and choose whether to accept it based on your own values and interests, not the agenda of the influencer. Your mental freedom. In a world where your thoughts, emotions, and decisions are constantly being influenced by forces you can't see, the ability to think clearly becomes a revolutionary act. Understanding these mental models and manipulation techniques isn't just about avoiding being controlled. It's about reclaiming your agency in a world designed to take it away. The most profound realization is that your mind, properly understood and defended, remains your own. No manipulation technique, no matter how sophisticated, can force you to believe something you genuinely choose to reject. But that choice requires awareness, knowledge, and the courage to think for yourself in a world that profits from your mental submission. Your consciousness is the final frontier. Protect it wisely. The brain is wired for shortcuts. It has to be. In a world where you process millions of pieces of information every second, your mind creates patterns, frameworks, and mental models to make sense of it all. These invisible structures shape how you perceive reality, how you make decisions, and how you navigate life. They're incredibly powerful tools for understanding the world. But in the wrong hands, they become weapons. Mental models are the lens through which you see everything. When you recognize a face in a crowd, categorize a situation as safe or dangerous, or predict how someone will react, you're using mental models. They're automatic, efficient, and usually helpful. But they're also hackable. And once someone understands how your mind works, they can rewrite your reality without you ever knowing it happened. Let's start with anchoring. This is one of the most exploited mental models in existence. Your brain uses the first piece of information it receives as an anchor, a reference point for everything that follows. Show someone a high price first, and suddenly everything else seems reasonable by comparison. Negotiators use this constantly. Start with an extreme position, and the compromise feels fair even when it's exactly what you wanted all along. Real estate agents show you overpriced houses first to make the target property seem like a bargain. Your anchor isn't based on value, it's based on whatever you saw first. Then there's social proof. Your brain assumes that if other people are doing something, it must be correct. This mental model evolved to keep you alive in groups, but now it's weaponized daily. Fake reviews, manufactured crowds, bots creating artificial popularity. The appearance of consensus becomes more powerful than actual quality or truth. You're not following evidence, you're following the illusion that everyone else knows something you don't. Authority bias works the same way. Your mind shortcuts around the hard work of evaluation by deferring to perceived expertise, a lab coat, a title, a confident tone, and suddenly you're more likely to believe almost anything. This isn't stupidity, it's efficiency, but it's also why scammers pose as doctors, why fake experts thrive online, and why confidence often matters more than competence. Scarcity hijacks your decision-making by triggering survival instincts. When something seems limited, your brain treats it as a threat to your resources. Limited time offers, exclusive access, only a few items left. None of this changes the actual value of what you're buying, but it changes how your brain processes the decision. You're not evaluating the product, you're responding to the fear of missing out. These mental models don't work in isolation. They're often combined, layered, and exploited simultaneously. A sales pitch might anchor you with a high price. Use social proof to show how popular the product is. Leverage authority by featuring expert testimonials, and create scarcity with a countdown timer. Your brain gets hit from multiple angles, and rational evaluation becomes nearly impossible. The framing effect shows how the same information can be presented in completely different ways to produce opposite reactions. A product that's 90% fat-free sounds healthier than one that contains 10% fat, even though they're identical. A medical treatment with a 70% success rate feels more appealing than one with a 30% failure rate. The facts don't change, your perception does. Mirror neurons make you unconsciously mimic the emotions and behaviors of others. This is how empathy works, how you connect with people, how you learn social skills, but it's also how skilled manipulators create instant rapport. They mirror your posture, your speech patterns, your energy level. Your brain interprets this as familiarity and trust, even though you've just met. The connection feels genuine because your neurons are literally firing in sync, but the synchronization was engineered. Commitment and consistency bias locks you into patterns once you've made an initial choice. Your brain wants your actions to align with your previous decisions, even when circumstances change. This is why foot-in-the-door techniques work so well. Get someone to agree to something small, and they'll rationalize larger commitments later to stay consistent with their earlier choice. You're not evaluating each decision independently. You're protecting your self-image as someone who keeps their word. The peak end rule means you judge experiences primarily based on their most intense moment and how they conclude. Everything in between fades into the background. This is why manipulative relationships often follow cycles of intense highs and lows. The peaks create powerful memories, and if things end on a positive note, you'll remember the entire experience more favorably than it deserves. Your brain prioritizes emotional intensity over duration or average quality. Loss aversion makes you fear losing something you have more than you desire, gaining something you don't. This asymmetry is exploited constantly. Free trials that automatically convert to paid subscriptions. Political messaging that focuses on what you'll lose rather than what you might gain. Investment schemes that emphasize protecting your wealth rather than growing it. You're not making decisions based on objective value. You're responding to the psychological pain of potential loss. Confirmation bias turns your mind into an echo chamber. You seek information that supports what you already believe and avoid or dismiss anything that challenges it. This mental model helps you maintain coherent worldviews, but it also makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Feed someone information that confirms their existing beliefs, and they'll trust you more. Challenge those beliefs, and they'll reject even the strongest evidence. Your brain protects your beliefs more fiercely than it seeks the truth. The availability heuristic makes recent, dramatic, or easily remembered events seem more likely than they actually are. Media coverage exploits this constantly. Rare but shocking events get massive attention, making them feel common. Meanwhile, everyday risks that actually affect more people get ignored because they're boring. Your assessment of danger isn't based on statistics. It's based on what comes to mind most easily. Cognitive dissonance creates mental tension when your beliefs conflict with reality. Rather than changing your beliefs, your brain often changes your perception of reality instead. This is why people double down on obviously false ideas when presented with contradictory evidence. Admitting error feels like admitting that your entire worldview might be wrong. So instead of updating your beliefs, you attack the source of conflicting information or find ways to explain it away. These mental models aren't flaws, they're features. They evolved to help you survive in a complex world by making quick decisions with incomplete information. But the modern world is different from the environment where these patterns developed. What once kept you alive can now be turned against you by anyone who understands how your mind works. The key to defending yourself isn't trying to eliminate these mental models. That's impossible and wouldn't be helpful even if you could do it. Instead, you need metacognitive awareness. You need to recognize when your mental models are being deliberately triggered, when someone is anchoring you with extreme positions, when social proof is being manufactured, when authority is being performed rather than earned, when scarcity is artificial, when framing is being used to manipulate your perception. This awareness doesn't make you immune to these effects, but it gives you a fighting chance. It allows you to slow down when you feel pressured to decide quickly, to seek out opposing viewpoints when everything seems to confirm what you want to believe, to question why you're being shown certain information in a certain way at a certain time. Mental models are the building blocks of thought. They can be tools for understanding or weapons for control. The difference lies in whether you're aware of how they work and whether you're consciously choosing when to use them. In a world where psychological manipulation has become an industry, that awareness isn't just helpful. It's essential for maintaining your mental freedom and making decisions that truly serve your interests rather than someone else's agenda. Understanding mental models doesn't just protect you from manipulation. It also helps you think more clearly, make better decisions, and see through the cognitive traps that surround us daily. Because once you understand how the mind works, you can work with it rather than against it. And in a complex world full of competing interests and hidden agendas, that understanding might be the most valuable tool you can develop. 3. hours of unexpected life lessons to fall asleep. Tuvhas, Part 10. Mental models aren't just abstract concepts. They're the hidden architecture of every decision you make. They work like invisible filters, sorting through endless information to help you navigate reality. But here's what most people miss. The same mental frameworks that help you think clearly can also be weaponized against you. Think about confirmation bias. In its healthy form, it helps you maintain consistent beliefs and avoid the mental exhaustion of questioning everything constantly. But when someone understands how confirmation bias works, they can feed you information that confirms what you already believe, slowly steering your thinking in directions that serve their agenda rather than your truth. This is the double-edged nature of mental models. They're tools, and like any tool, they can be used to build or to destroy, to clarify or to manipulate, to empower or to control. Consider the availability heuristic, your brain's tendency to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily you can recall examples. This mental shortcut usually serves you well. If you can quickly remember several car accidents on a particular road, your brain flags that route as dangerous, keeping you safe. But media organizations understand this heuristic intimately. They know that by repeatedly showing you certain types of stories, they can make those events seem more common than they actually are, shaping your perception of reality without you even realizing it. The anchoring effect demonstrates this manipulation even more clearly. When you're negotiating a salary, the first number mentioned, whether reasonable or absurd, becomes the anchor around which all subsequent negotiations revolve. Skilled negotiators don't just use this accidentally, they weaponize it. They throw out an extreme anchor not because they expect you to accept it, but because they know it will make their real offer seem reasonable by comparison. This brings us to a crucial realization. Awareness of mental models isn't just about thinking better, it's about psychological self-defense. When you understand how your mind works, you can recognize when someone is trying to exploit those natural patterns. Take the scarcity principle. Your brain is wired to value things more when they seem rare or disappearing. This helped your ancestors survive. When food was scarce, those who acted quickly lived longer. But modern marketers have turned this survival mechanism into a profit engine. Limited time offer. Only 3 left in stock. This deal expires at midnight. They're not just selling products. They're hijacking your evolutionary programming. The social proof mechanism works similarly. Humans survived by following the crowd. If everyone was running, you ran too, even if you didn't see the danger. This instinct kept communities safe. But now, it's used to manufacture consensus. Fake reviews, bot accounts, and astroturfing campaigns all exploit your natural tendency to follow what appears to be the majority opinion. Understanding these patterns changes everything. It doesn't make you paranoid or cynical. It makes you free. When you recognize that someone is trying to create artificial scarcity, you can pause and ask whether you actually need what they're selling. When you notice social proof being manufactured, you can look for authentic evidence instead of following the crowd. The key is developing what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, thinking about thinking. Instead of just having thoughts, you begin to observe the process of thinking itself. You notice when your mind is taking shortcuts, when emotions are influencing logic, when outside forces are trying to guide your conclusions. This metacognitive awareness reveals something profound. Most of your thoughts aren't really yours. They're the product of mental models shaped by evolution, culture, media, and the countless influences around you. But once you see this clearly, you can begin to choose your thoughts more deliberately. The narrative fallacy shows this perfectly. Your brain loves stories. They help you make sense of complex information and remember important details. But this love of narrative makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Politicians, advertisers, and propagandists know that a compelling story will often override facts and logic. They don't need to prove their point. They just need to tell a story that feels true. When you understand the narrative fallacy, you can appreciate stories for their emotional value while maintaining analytical distance. You can enjoy the narrative while asking, what evidence supports this story? What alternative explanations might exist? What am I not being told? This balance between engagement and analysis is crucial. Mental models aren't meant to make you a cold, calculating machine. They're meant to help you think clearly while still feeling deeply, to be both wise and passionate, both careful and courageous. The sunk cost fallacy illustrates this beautifully. Your brain hates waste, so it pushes you to continue investments that aren't working simply because you've already invested so much. This can trap you in bad relationships, failing projects, or ineffective strategies. But understanding this bias doesn't mean becoming heartless. It means recognizing when persistence becomes stubbornness, when loyalty becomes self-destruction. Pattern recognition is perhaps the most fundamental of all mental models. Your brain is constantly looking for patterns, finding connections, predicting what comes next. This ability has driven every major human advancement, from agriculture to technology to art. But it also makes you susceptible to seeing patterns that don't exist, connections that aren't real, predictions that won't come true. The solution isn't to stop looking for patterns. That would make you less human, less creative, less effective. The solution is to hold your patterns lightly, to remain open to evidence that contradicts your expectations, to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. This is where mental models become truly powerful. They're not rigid rules, but flexible tools. They help you think faster and more clearly, but they also remind you when to slow down and question your assumptions. They give you confidence in your reasoning while maintaining humility about your limitations. Consider the planning fallacy, your tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take and overestimate your ability to complete them efficiently. This bias has probably caused you countless frustrations, missed deadlines, and broken promises. But it exists for a reason. Optimism bias helped your ancestors take risks, explore new territories, attempt difficult projects. Without it, humans might never have left their caves. The goal isn't to eliminate optimism bias, but to calibrate it. When planning, you can use reference class forecasting, looking at how long similar projects actually took rather than how long you hope they'll take. You maintain your natural optimism while adding a dose of realistic preparation. This calibration process applies to all mental models. The confirmation bias that helps you maintain stable beliefs can be balanced with active seeking of contradictory evidence. The availability heuristic that helps you make quick decisions can be supplemented with broader research when decisions are important. The social proof that helps you fit into communities can be tempered with independent verification when stakes are high. What emerges is a kind of cognitive flexibility, the ability to use mental models when they serve you and step outside them when they don't. This flexibility isn't natural, it's learned. It requires practice, attention, and often uncomfortable self-examination. But the payoff is enormous. When you understand how your mind works, you become less manipulable, less reactive, less driven by unconscious forces. You begin to choose your responses rather than simply having reactions. You start to shape your thoughts rather than being shaped by them. This doesn't mean you become immune to influence. That would be neither possible nor desirable. Humans are social creatures. We learn from each other, inspire each other, support each other. But understanding mental models helps you distinguish between healthy influence and harmful manipulation, between wisdom and propaganda, between genuine persuasion and psychological exploitation. The representativeness heuristic shows this distinction clearly. When you judge the probability of something based on how closely it resembles your mental prototype, you're using a generally useful shortcut. If someone walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, but this heuristic can be exploited. Scammers dress professionally and speak confidently because they know you'll assume they're legitimate. Fake experts use technical jargon and confident assertions because they know you'll assume they're knowledgeable. Understanding this heuristic doesn't make you suspicious of everyone who dresses professionally or speaks confidently. It makes you aware that appearances can be deceiving, that credentials can be faked, that confidence doesn't equal competence. You learn to look for substance behind the surface, evidence behind the assertions. The endowment effect reveals another layer of this dynamic. Once you own something, or even think you own it, you value it more highly than you did before. This bias helped your ancestors defend their resources and maintain their possessions. But marketers exploit it ruthlessly. Free trials, test drives, and try before you buy offers all work by triggering the endowment effect. Once something feels like yours, giving it up feels like a loss. Recognizing this doesn't mean avoiding all trials or samples. It means entering them with awareness, maintaining psychological distance from the object until you've made a conscious decision about its actual value to you. This awareness extends to ideas and beliefs as well. The endowment effect applies to thoughts just as much as things. Once you've invested time and energy in a belief, abandoning it feels like a loss, even when evidence suggests it's wrong. This is why changing minds is so difficult, why people defend obviously false beliefs, why admitting error feels so painful. But when you understand this dynamic, you can hold your beliefs more lightly. You can invest in ideas without becoming overly attached to them. You can change your mind without losing face, update your beliefs without losing identity. The loss aversion that underlies the endowment effect shows up everywhere in human behavior. You feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as you feel the pleasure of gaining the same thing. This asymmetry shaped your ancestors' survival strategies. It was better to avoid loss than to pursue gain when resources were scarce. But in modern contexts, loss aversion can paralyze you. Fear of losing what you have can prevent you from taking beneficial risks, making necessary changes, pursuing worthwhile opportunities. Understanding this bias doesn't eliminate the fear, but it helps you calibrate it. You can acknowledge the discomfort of potential loss while still making rational decisions about risk and reward. The framing effect demonstrates how easily your perceptions can be manipulated through presentation rather than substance. The same information can be made to seem positive or negative, safe or risky, urgent or routine, simply by changing how it's described. A medical treatment with a 90% success rate sounds much better than one with a 10% failure rate, even though they're mathematically identical. This isn't just about resisting manipulation, it's about understanding that perspective shapes reality. The frames you choose for interpreting events, relationships, and challenges fundamentally alter your experience of them. When you understand framing, you can choose frames that serve you rather than being trapped by frames imposed on you. The affect heuristic shows how emotions color judgment in ways you rarely notice. When you feel good about something, you're more likely to see it as beneficial and low risk. When you feel bad about something, you're more likely to see it as harmful and dangerous. This emotional coloring happens automatically, below the level of conscious awareness. Understanding this doesn't mean distrusting all emotional responses. Emotions carry important information about your values, relationships, and environment. But it does mean recognizing when emotional responses might be clouding analytical thinking, when gut reactions might be based on irrelevant associations rather than relevant evidence. This emotional awareness becomes crucial when dealing with complex decisions where multiple factors must be weighed. Your feelings about one aspect of a decision can unconsciously influence how you evaluate all other aspects. A job offer from a company you admire might make you overlook red flags in the contract. An investment opportunity recommended by someone you dislike might make you dismiss genuine merits. The key is learning to separate emotional reactions from analytical evaluation. You can acknowledge that you feel excited about an opportunity while still examining it critically. You can recognize that you feel uncomfortable with a proposal while still evaluating it fairly. This separation doesn't require becoming emotionally numb. In fact, it often leads to richer emotional experiences because you're not constantly second-guessing your feelings or being hijacked by them. When you understand how emotions and reasoning interact, you can use both more effectively. The anchoring bias we discussed earlier has another crucial dimension. It affects not just negotiations and prices, but your entire sense of what's possible. The first examples you encounter in any domain become anchors for what you think is normal, achievable, or acceptable. If you grow up seeing certain limitations, those limitations can become mental anchors that constrain your imagination of what's possible. But anchors can also be reset. When you expose yourself to new examples, higher standards, different possibilities, you can shift your reference points. This is why successful people often credit mentors, books, or experiences that showed them what was possible, rather than just teaching them how to do it. Understanding anchoring means actively choosing your reference points, rather than passively accepting whatever you encounter first. It means seeking out examples of excellence, possibility, and achievement, rather than settling for whatever happens to be around you. The availability cascade shows how ideas can gain credibility simply through repetition rather than evidence. When you hear something often enough, it starts to feel true, even if it's not. This effect is amplified by social media and echo chambers, where the same ideas circulate repeatedly among like-minded people. Recognizing availability cascades doesn't mean dismissing popular ideas automatically. Some ideas are popular because they're true and useful. But it does mean distinguishing between ideas that are familiar and ideas that are valid, between claims that feel true because you've heard them often, and claims that are actually supported by evidence. This distinction becomes crucial in an information environment where anyone can publish anything, where sophisticated actors deliberately create false cascades, where the loudest voices often drown out the most accurate ones. The ability to trace ideas back to their sources, to distinguish between repetition and verification, becomes the essential skill. The cognitive ease that makes familiar ideas feel true also affects how you process new information. When something is easy to understand, easy to remember, or easy to pronounce, your brain interprets that ease as a signal of truth. This is why effective communication often involves making complex ideas simple rather than making simple ideas complex. But this preference for cognitive ease can be exploited. Simple explanations aren't always correct explanations. Easy answers aren't always right answers. Memorable slogans aren't always accurate summaries. Understanding this bias helps you appreciate clarity while maintaining skepticism about oversimplification. The conjunction fallacy reveals another way your intuitive reasoning can lead you astray. When details are added to a scenario, even irrelevant details, the scenario can feel more likely rather than less likely, even though adding any condition mathematically reduces probability. This happens because your brain confuses plausibility with probability. A detailed story feels more real than a simple one, even when the details make the story statistically less likely. This is why conspiracy theories often feel compelling. They provide detailed explanations for complex events, even when simpler explanations are more probable. Recognizing this fallacy doesn't mean dismissing all detailed explanations. Sometimes details are relevant, and complex situations require complex understanding. But it does mean distinguishing between explanations that feel satisfying and explanations that are actually probable, between stories that make sense and stories that are likely true. The base rate neglect that often accompanies conjunction fallacies shows how individual details can overwhelm statistical reasoning. When evaluating whether someone belongs to a particular category, you might focus on how well they fit the stereotype, while ignoring how common that category actually is. This neglect of base rates affects everything from medical diagnosis to criminal justice to everyday social judgments. A rare disease might perfectly explain a set of symptoms, but if the disease affects only 1 in a million people, common diseases are still more likely explanations. Understanding base rates doesn't mean ignoring individual characteristics or unique circumstances. It means balancing specific evidence with general probabilities, recognizing that unusual cases do occur, but common cases occur more often. The planning fallacy we touched on earlier connects to a broader pattern of optimism bias that affects not just time estimation, but risk assessment, outcome prediction, and self-evaluation. You tend to overestimate your abilities, underestimate obstacles, and expect better outcomes than statistics would suggest. This optimism bias serves important functions. It motivates effort, encourages risk-taking, and maintains mental health. Without it, you might become paralyzed by an accurate assessment of how difficult life actually is. But uncalibrated optimism can lead to poor preparation, inadequate resources, and crushing disappointment when reality doesn't match expectations. The solution isn't pessimism, but realistic optimism, maintaining hope and motivation while preparing for likely challenges. This means using reference class forecasting when planning, building buffers into timelines, and developing contingency plans for setbacks. The overconfidence effect that underlies much optimism bias has a particularly insidious quality. The less you know about something, the more confident you tend to feel about it. This is because incompetence in a domain makes it difficult to recognize incompetence in that same domain. You don't know what you don't know. This Dunning-Kruger effect explains why beginners often feel more confident than experts, why people with little knowledge of complex topics hold the strongest opinions, why the most dangerous individuals are often those who know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be careful. Understanding this effect requires intellectual humility, recognizing that confidence and competence don't always correlate. That feeling certain doesn't mean being right. That expertise often brings awareness of complexity rather than simple answers. The hindsight bias creates another layer of overconfidence by making past events seem more predictable than they actually were. After something happens, you unconsciously restructure your memory to make the outcome seem inevitable. This "I knew it all along" feeling makes you overestimate your ability to predict future events. Hindsight bias serves a function. It helps you extract lessons from experience and maintain confidence in your judgment, but it also prevents accurate learning by obscuring the role of chance, the difficulty of prediction, and the complexity of causation. Combating hindsight bias requires actively remembering uncertainty. Before outcomes are known, write down your predictions and confidence levels. After outcomes are known, compare your predictions to reality rather than trusting your reconstructed memory of what you expected. The fundamental attribution error shows how these biases extend beyond self-perception to social judgment. When others fail or make mistakes, you tend to attribute their behavior to character flaws or personal inadequacies. When you fail or make mistakes, you tend to attribute your behavior to circumstances or situational factors. This asymmetry in attribution serves self-protective functions, but creates systematic misunderstandings about human behavior. It makes you too harsh in judging others and too lenient in judging yourself. It obscures the powerful role that situations play in shaping behavior. Understanding attribution errors doesn't mean abandoning personal responsibility or character judgment. It means recognizing that behavior emerges from the interaction between personality and situation, that good people can do bad things in bad circumstances, that understanding someone's actions requires understanding their context. The just world hypothesis reveals another way your mind protects itself from uncomfortable realities. You have a strong psychological need to believe that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. This belief helps you feel safe and maintain faith in fairness, but it also leads to victim blaming and system justification. When bad things happen to good people, the just world hypothesis can make you search for ways the victims brought misfortune on themselves, rather than acknowledging that sometimes terrible things happen randomly. When systemic inequalities exist, this bias can make you defend unfair systems by assuming they must be meritocratic. Recognizing this bias doesn't require abandoning all belief in justice or personal agency. It means distinguishing between descriptive claims about how the world actually works and normative claims about how it should work. You can work toward justice while acknowledging injustice. The system justification tendency that often accompanies just world thinking shows how mental models can perpetuate the status quo, even when change would be beneficial. People tend to defend existing systems, institutions, and arrangements, even when those systems work against their own interests. This tendency serves psychological functions. It reduces uncertainty, provides a sense of control, and maintains social stability. But it can also prevent necessary reforms, perpetuate harmful inequalities, and blind you to better alternatives. Understanding system justification doesn't mean becoming a revolutionary or rejecting all existing institutions. It means maintaining the ability to critique systems you're part of, to imagine alternatives to current arrangements, to distinguish between what is and what could be. The status quo bias that underlies system justification affects individual decisions as well. You tend to stick with current choices, current providers, current routines, even when better alternatives are available. Change requires effort and involves risk, so your default mode is maintenance rather than optimization. This bias serves important functions. It provides stability, reduces decision fatigue, and prevents constant upheaval. But it can also trap you in suboptimal situations, prevent beneficial changes, and make you miss opportunities for improvement.